At 10:15 in the morning on April 9, 1943, Captain Alexander Porrishkin climbed into the cockpit of his P-39 Araco Cobra at a forward airfield near Krymskaya in southern Russia. His heart raced, not out of fear, but anticipation. Today, he would fly the American-built fighter that almost everyone had dismissed as useless, and prove its worth in ways the Western world could not imagine. The P-39 had a reputation that preceded it. British pilots called it a death trap. Americans in the Pacific found it hopelessly sluggish at high altitude, and nearly every Western Air Force that tried it wrote it off as unfit for combat. Yet here it was, in the hands of Soviet pilots, about to challenge that perception. Just a day earlier, Porrishkin's commanding officer had told him that the new fighters would arrive soon, part of the Lend-Lease shipments from the United States. The British had tested them and rejected them. Americans had flown them briefly against the Japanese in the Pacific, only to replace them with better aircraft. Now, these discarded machines were being sent to Russia, and pilots like Porrishkin were expected to fly them against the deadly Luftwaffe. For 2 years, Porrishkin had flown Yak-1s and MiG-3s, both solid Soviet designs capable of holding their own against German aircraft. But they had their flaws: radios that barely worked, guns that jammed, engines that sometimes failed mid-flight. The P-39, despite its poor reputation, offered new possibilities if handled correctly. The P-39 had one fatal flaw that doomed it in the eyes of American and British forces. During development in 1938, the prototype had a turbocharger, allowing excellent high-altitude performance. The XB-39 first flew on April 6, 1938, reaching 390 mph at 20,000 ft in just 5 minutes. But by 1939, engineers removed the turbocharger to reduce drag and simplify production. That decision destroyed the aircraft's high-altitude capabilities. Above 15,000 ft, the engine struggled for air, and by 20,000 ft, the plane was almost helpless. For air forces expecting high-altitude bomber escorts, this was unacceptable. In the Pacific, American pilots quickly discovered what the British had already learned. The P-39 could not climb fast enough to intercept enemy bombers, control responses were sluggish at high altitude, and Japanese Zero fighters outmaneuvered it easily. Lieutenant Evan Stevens described the frustration vividly. The P-39 looked powerful, with its nose-mounted 37 cannon, but in actual combat, it struggled to perform as needed. Missions often ended with aircraft out of position, unable to engage the enemy effectively, while pilots watched comrades fall below them. Even the powerful 37 cannon proved unreliable in practice. It had a slow firing rate, heavy shells with awkward trajectories, and jammed frequently. Pilots often had to rely solely on machine guns, which were too light to inflict significant damage. By the end of 1942, American pilots nicknamed the P-39 the Iron Dog, requesting transfers to P-38 squadrons whenever possible. The kill ratio in the Pacific was dismal, about 1:1, barely adequate for an air force attempting to achieve dominance. The only American ace to emerge in the P-39 was Second Lieutenant William Fiedler, who shot down 5 Japanese aircraft before tragically dying in a ground accident when a P-38 collided with his parked P-39. Yet in Russia, the story was different. The Eastern Front's combat conditions played perfectly to the P-39's strengths: low to medium altitude air battles, frequent ground support missions, and a tactical environment that required speed, maneuverability, and firepower at these levels allowed the Araco Cobra to shine. Soviet test pilots quickly adapted to the aircraft. While they confirmed its tendency for dangerous flat spins when flown incorrectly, they discovered its true potential at lower altitudes. The Allison engine produced strong power, the plane rolled crisply, and visibility from the bubble canopy was excellent. Most importantly, the P-39 had a reliable radio, a rare feature among Soviet fighters, which transformed coordination in the air. Soviet pilots quickly adjusted tactics to take advantage of the P-39's strengths. The 37 cannon, though temperamental for Americans, became a formidable weapon in skilled Soviet hands. Pilots trained to close the distance before firing, mastering lead angles and trajectory. The nose-mounted .50 caliber machine guns provided additional firepower, while the wing-mounted .30 caliber guns were removed to reduce weight and improve roll rate. These modifications, combined with meticulous maintenance, transformed the Araco Cobra into a deadly weapon tailored to the Eastern Front. Alexander Porrishkin emerged as the P-39's champion. By early 1943, he had nearly 20 victories flying MiG-3s and Yak-1s. When his regiment converted to P-39s, he devoted himself to mastering the aircraft, experimenting with tactics, and developing formations that leveraged its strengths. The bookshelf formation, for example, stacked aircraft at different altitudes, allowing each layer to cover the one below. Soviet pilots coordinated attacks using reliable radio communication, while ground-based radar stations guided them toward enemy formations. On April 9, 1943, Porrishkin flew his first combat mission in a P-39. 8 Araco Cobras intercepted a German formation over Krymskaya. Rolling in from above, he engaged a Bf-109, his 37 cannon tearing through the fuselage. The German fighter rolled, inverted, and fell in flames, Porrishkin's first kill in the P-39. Just 3 days later, he shot down 4 more Messerschmitts in a single engagement, using precise coordination and altitude advantage. By the end of April, he had 12 victories in the Araco Cobra, setting an example for his regiment. Soviet success with the P-39 wasn't limited to Porrishkin. His wingmen, including Grigory Rakolov, Nikolai Gulev, Dmitry Glinker, and Ivan Babak, achieved remarkable results. Many scored the majority of their victories in American-built fighters. Soviet mechanics, given more autonomy than their Western counterparts, fine-tuned the aircraft in ways that improved performance, reliability, and survivability. The combination of skilled pilots, tactical innovation, and meticulous maintenance turned the P-39 into one of the most effective fighters on the Eastern Front. By mid-1943, Soviet P-39 units were dominating air battles. Kill ratios improved, and German pilots began to fear engagements with formations led by Porrishkin and his comrades. The Araco Cobra, once dismissed as worthless, had become a symbol of Soviet adaptability and skill. The aircraft's radio system, firepower, maneuverability, and sturdy construction, all fully exploited, allowed Soviet pilots to achieve air superiority where other forces had failed. By late April 1943. The P-39 Araco Cobra had become a trusted instrument of Soviet air power. Pilots who had once regarded it with skepticism now relied on it implicitly. The aircraft's unique combination of firepower, agility at low and medium altitudes, and reliable communications completely changed how the Soviets fought in the air. Captain Alexander Porrishkin had shown what was possible, and soon the entire 16th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment was following his lead. Ground crews played a vital role in this transformation. While American maintenance protocols adhered rigidly to factory specifications, Soviet mechanics had the flexibility to innovate. Wing guns were removed, control cables were adjusted, radios upgraded, and other small but crucial modifications were made. Each improvement, no matter how minor on paper, amplified the P-39's effectiveness in combat. Field modifications like these were rare in the Luftwaffe and almost unheard of in American units. Yet, in Soviet service, they were routine and decisive. The regiment experimented with formation flying to maximize the Araco Cobra's strengths. The bookshelf formation, conceived by Porrishkin, was revolutionary. Aircraft were stacked at varying altitudes, each layer responsible for a specific role. Enemy fighters attempting to escape the first layer would be intercepted by the second, while the third provided cover and reinforcement. This level of coordination was possible only because of the P-39's reliable SCR-522 radios, allowing pilots to communicate as if they were side by side in a room rather than spread across the sky. Porrishkin's skill and determination quickly became legendary. On April 12, just 3 days after his first mission, he shot down 4 Messerschmitt Bf-109s in a single engagement. Coordinating with his flight, he used the bookshelf formation to dictate the terms of the fight, taking advantage of the Aracobra's speed and maneuverability at mid-altitudes. The German pilots struggled to respond. Their attacks were anticipated and countered with precision. The Aracobra's concentrated firepower, with its 37 cannon and twin .50 caliber machine guns, proved deadly against the enemy fighters. As Porrishkin's victories mounted, other Soviet pilots began achieving similar success. Grigory Rakolov, despite being colorblind, a condition that should have disqualified him from flying, found his stride in the P-39. He adapted perfectly to the aircraft's characteristics and aggressive tactics, scoring 12 victories in 2 months during combat over Kuban. The aircraft matched his style: fast, durable, and powerful at the altitudes most Eastern Front battles were fought. Nikolai Gulev, another ace, scored more than half of his 57 victories in the P-39, known for aggressive tactics and pinpoint accuracy. He closed distances to extremely short ranges before opening fire, maximizing the Aracobra's effectiveness. Dmitry Glinker, methodical and analytical, tallied 50 victories, the majority in P-39s. Unlike more instinct-driven aces, he meticulously studied enemy tactics and adjusted accordingly, complementing Porrishkin's bold innovations. Ivan Babak, renowned for his keen eyesight, could spot enemy aircraft at extreme range and direct his formation with precision, using the P-39's superior radio to guide coordinated attacks. The pattern was clear. The P-39 excelled in Soviet hands. Half of the Soviet Union's top 10 aces achieved most of their victories in American-built fighters. This was no coincidence. It was the result of matching aircraft capabilities to operational requirements and leveraging the unique conditions of the Eastern Front. Combat often occurred between 5,000 and 15,000 feet, altitudes where the P-39 thrived. Low-level ground attack missions, medium-altitude escort, and support for massive tank battles all played to its strengths while avoiding the weaknesses that had doomed it in Western service. The journey of each aircraft to the Soviet front was epic. P-39s left Bell Aircraft's factory in Wheatfield, New York, and were flown across the continental United States by women of the Women Air Force Service pilots WASPs to Great Falls, Montana. From there, American pilots ferried them to Alaska. The final leg across the Bering Sea to Siberia was deadly. Pilots faced fierce storms, freezing waters, and isolation. A single engine failure meant certain death. Those who made it alive delivered aircraft that would become instruments of unprecedented Soviet air success. Soviet pilots named their P-39s Kobushka, or Cobra Swallow, expressing genuine affection for the fighters. The name reflected not only the aircraft's deadly power, but also the pilots' pride in mastering a plane that others had discarded. Every successful engagement reinforced the bond between pilot and machine. The Aracobra became more than a tool. It became an extension of the pilot's skill and courage. By mid-1943, the Eastern Front had become a proving ground for Soviet tactical innovation. Porrishkin, Rakolov, Gulev, Glinker, Babak, and others perfected a combination of aggressive teamwork, precise formation flying, and communication that outmatched the Germans in many engagements. German pilots, once confident, began reporting increasing difficulty achieving success against Soviet fighters. Porrishkin's unit, in particular, became feared. Luftwaffe radio operators recognized the distinctive call signs and often ordered pilots to remain grounded when his squadron took to the air. This psychological edge was profound. German pilots who had dominated the skies for years found themselves facing a coordinated, aggressive, and well-informed enemy. Tactics that had once guaranteed success now failed. Experienced Luftwaffe aces fell to Soviet P-39 pilots, often in situations where German superiority had seemed overwhelming. The advantage was not only technical but also operational. Soviet pilots had adapted their aircraft, tactics, and training to the realities of the Eastern Front. By September 1943, the kill ratio had shifted dramatically. Earlier in the war, Soviet losses often exceeded German kills by a factor of 5:1. With P-39 units fully operational, that ratio had flipped, with Soviet pilots frequently destroying more German aircraft than they lost. Individual engagements, such as Porrishkin's downing of 3 Ju-88 bombers on September 21 at low altitude, showcased the Araco Cobra's lethal combination of firepower and tactical innovation. Ground troops and journalists witnessed these feats, further spreading his fame. The P-39's effectiveness was not just in the hands of aces. Entire units coordinated, executed complex formations, and utilized ground radar to guide fighters to optimal engagement positions. Innovations such as the pendulum patrol, where fighters flew overlapping elliptical paths to maintain coverage and speed, became standard. These methods would have been impossible without reliable radios and disciplined pilots, both of which the P-39 provided. By the end of 1943, the 16th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, fully equipped with Araco Cobras, was one of the most formidable Soviet units on the Eastern Front. German intelligence reports confirmed the growing difficulties Luftwaffe pilots faced. They studied wrecked P-39s, noting minor modifications such as removed wing guns and upgraded radios, yet could not understand how such seemingly small changes produced overwhelming tactical advantages. The secret was clear. Soviet pilots and mechanics were using every advantage, optimizing their equipment, and innovating rapidly, a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies and slow adaptation of German and American forces. By early 1944, the P-39's legend on the Eastern Front was firmly established. The aircraft, once dismissed by Western air forces as a failure, had become a symbol of Soviet ingenuity and adaptability. Pilots who mastered it understood that its true strength lay not in raw high-altitude performance, but in clever tactics, teamwork, and exploiting the P-39's exceptional capabilities at medium and low altitudes. Alexander Porrishkin continued to dominate the skies. His victories accumulated steadily, a testament to both his skill and the Araco Cobra's potential. By June 1944, he had scored 47 confirmed victories in P-39s alone, making him the highest-scoring Soviet ace in an American-built aircraft. His strategic innovations, like the bookshelf formation and radar-guided intercepts, had been adopted across multiple regiments. The Soviets were no longer reacting defensively. They were dictating the terms of combat, striking with precision, and controlling the airspace in ways previously unimaginable. Grigory Rakolov, whose color blindness had once threatened his career, thrived alongside Porrishkin. Flying P-39s, he adapted seamlessly to the aircraft's handling quirks and aggressive flight envelope. He scored 44 of his 56 total victories in the Araco Cobra, meticulously maintaining his two favorite planes, P-39 serial numbers 428747 and 442547. Each aircraft bore his initials, RGA, a mark of his connection to the machines that had become extensions of his skill. The trust between pilot and aircraft was mutual. Soviet mechanics ensured each fighter was meticulously serviced, maximizing reliability even under the harshest frontline conditions. Other aces followed similar paths. Nikolai Gulev's precision tactics, Dmitry Glinker's analytical methods, Ivan Babak's early warning skills. Each pilot adapted their approach to exploit the P-39's strengths. Collectively, they transformed Soviet air operations. No longer limited by the perceived weaknesses of their aircraft, these pilots turned previously overlooked machines into dominant weapons. The contrast with American and British experiences could not have been starker. In the Pacific and European theaters, the P-39 had been hampered by mission profiles it was never designed for: high-altitude bomber interception and aggressive solo pursuit. The aircraft's limitations were exposed, leading to poor kill ratios and frustrated pilots. In Soviet hands, however, the P-39's characteristics — reliable low and medium-altitude performance, heavy firepower, and excellent communications — aligned perfectly with operational realities. By mid-1944, Luftwaffe pilots began to fear the P-39 more than any other single threat on the Eastern Front. German reports frequently mentioned Soviet formations flying aggressively coordinated attacks with American-built fighters. They struggled to understand how Soviet pilots consistently defeated numerically equal or superior forces. Each downed aircraft was a lesson in adaptation, teamwork, and tactical intelligence. The psychological impact was undeniable. German pilots, once confident, now approached engagements with caution and apprehension. The operational success of the P-39 extended beyond individual heroics. Entire Soviet squadrons adopted new doctrines that leveraged the aircraft's unique capabilities. Low-level ground attack missions, mid-altitude fighter cover, and coordinated bomber intercepts became routine. Soviet pilots executed the pendulum patrol, bookshelf formations, and radar-guided intercepts with precision, achieving kill ratios that steadily improved throughout 1944. Even as the Luftwaffe introduced newer aircraft like the FW-190 and late-model Bf-109s, Soviet P-39 units continued to excel. Tactical innovation, formation discipline, and careful exploitation of the aircraft's strengths allowed them to survive and dominate, even against technologically superior enemies. The P-39 had become more than a fighter plane; it was a force multiplier. The human stories behind these victories were equally compelling. Pilots endured freezing conditions, limited supplies, and relentless enemy fire. They lost comrades, yet the lessons learned from each engagement refined their tactics further. Mechanics and ground crews, working tirelessly under harsh conditions, ensured the aircraft were ready for combat at a moment's notice. Together, pilot and machine created a synergy that overcame every obstacle and outmatched the Germans repeatedly. By the final year of the war, the P-39 had cemented its legacy. Over 4,700 Airacobras had been delivered to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease agreements. These aircraft accounted for more than a third of all American and British fighters in Soviet service. Despite battlefield losses, over 1,000 P-39s destroyed, the victories achieved with the aircraft were disproportionate, tipping the scales of air combat in favor of the Soviets. The story of the P-39 on the Eastern Front culminated in May 1945. On May 9th, Soviet Captain Vasily Shinashikov flying an Aerocobra shot down a German FW-189 reconnaissance aircraft over Prague. This was the last aerial victory of World War II in Europe. Hours later, Germany surrendered. The P-39, rejected and dismissed by Western air forces, had scored the final kill of the European war. That very day, a German Me-262 jet WNED a P-39 over Bohemia, marking the Luftwaffe's last victory. The Aerocobra had been present at both the beginning and the end of Soviet Lend-Lease operations, proving its enduring value in combat. Post-war evaluations confirmed what Soviet pilots had long known. The P-39 was not inherently flawed; it had simply been misapplied elsewhere. American and British forces had failed to leverage its strengths, exposing weaknesses that Soviet tactics expertly mitigated. In contrast, the Eastern Front provided the perfect environment for the aircraft's capabilities to shine. Pilots who mastered the Aerocobra consistently achieved exceptional results, demonstrating that context and strategy often outweigh raw specifications. Alexander Porrishkin retired as Marshal of Aviation, leaving a legacy inseparable from the P-39. Grigory Rakolov and other aces also enjoyed distinguished careers, their combat experience forever linked to the aircraft that had been dismissed as a failure elsewhere. The P-39 story is a lesson in innovation, adaptability, and understanding one's tools. A cautionary tale for military planners, historians, and aviation enthusiasts alike. The P-39 Araco Cobra remains a symbol of Soviet ingenuity, an American fighter rejected elsewhere but perfected on the Eastern Front, achieving results that changed the course of the war in the skies above Russia. Its legacy reminds us that success depends not only on technology but on strategy, adaptation, and the courage to exploit opportunities where others see only limitations. After the war, the P-39 Araco Cobra continued to occupy a unique place in aviation history. Unlike most aircraft retired from active service shortly after combat, the P-39 served in the Soviet Air Force until 1949. Its longevity was a testament not only to the aircraft's design, but to the innovative use Soviet pilots had made of it during the war. These planes, once derided as failures, had become legends. They had secured victories, shaped air combat doctrine, and changed perceptions of what a fighter could accomplish under the right conditions. For Alexander Porrishkin, the end of combat did not mean the end of influence. He remained deeply involved in Soviet aviation, training new generations of pilots and shaping tactical doctrine based on his experiences. His insights, born from both victories and the frustrations of testing a controversial aircraft in real combat, became invaluable lessons for future Soviet air strategy. He frequently reflected that the P-39's success was never due to luck or pilot skill alone. It was the combination of careful planning, adaptation to tactical realities, and relentless pursuit of mastery over the aircraft's quirks. Similarly, Grigory Rakolov carried forward the lessons he had learned in combat. His meticulous maintenance of his favorite Araco Cobras, the strategic use of formations, and his personal innovations in dogfight tactics became the foundation of his post-war career. Rakolov went on to write 2 books about his experiences, chronicling not just his personal achievements, but also the broader narrative of how the Araco Cobra had been transformed into a dominant weapon on the Eastern Front. His work remains a primary source for historians studying the unique intersection of Lend-Lease technology and Soviet tactical ingenuity. The Araco Cobra's influence extended far beyond individual aces. The success of the P-39 demonstrated a crucial lesson in military aviation. The context of use determines the effectiveness of technology. The same aircraft that had failed miserably for Americans in the Pacific and British in Europe became a near-perfect tool for Soviet pilots. The lesson was clear: superior design alone does not guarantee success. Understanding mission requirements, operational environments, and the skill set of pilots, and aligning those factors with the strengths of the machine, can transform a seemingly flawed tool into an extraordinary asset. The story of the P-39 Araco Cobra also reshaped the way Soviet and later international military analysts viewed American aircraft. While Western evaluations often dismiss the Araco Cobra based on its high-altitude shortcomings, the Soviet experience illustrated that flexibility, adaptation, and tactical innovation could make up for raw performance limitations. Soviet pilots, mechanics, and commanders learned to exploit the aircraft's strengths fully: mid- and low-altitude performance, formidable nose-mounted firepower, and reliable radio communication. Each modification made in the field, from removing wing guns to adjusting control cables, was a testament to the ingenuity born of necessity and the willingness to challenge rigid doctrinal approaches. The pilots themselves developed deep bonds with their Araco Cobras. For many, including Porrishkin, Rakolov, and Babak, these aircraft were not just tools but companions in combat. They trusted their fighters to respond under pressure, to endure battle damage, and to give them the edge in life-or-death encounters. When Babcock spotted enemy aircraft at extreme ranges and guided his wingmen to optimal attack positions, the reliability of the P-39 systems and the responsiveness of its flight controls were critical to the success of those missions. The pilots' deep knowledge of their machines, combined with tactical brilliance, created a force multiplier that reshaped aerial engagements on the Eastern Front. By the end of the war, the P-39 Araco Cobra had proven its worth in numbers that stunned both contemporaries and later historians. Over 4,700 Araco Cobras were delivered to the Soviet Union, accounting for more than a third of all American and British fighters supplied under Lend-Lease. Soviet P-39 units collectively achieved approximately 3,000 individual aerial victories, a remarkable tally considering the aircraft's troubled reputation elsewhere. This high success rate was not the result of chance. It was the product of deliberate alignment between aircraft capabilities, pilot training, tactical innovation, and battlefield conditions. The psychological impact on German forces was profound. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots, once confident in their superior aircraft and training, found themselves at a disadvantage against Soviet P-39 formations. Reports repeatedly mention the distinctive sound of Allison engines and the aggressive, coordinated tactics of Soviet pilots. German intelligence struggled to explain why these ostensibly ordinary aircraft performed so effectively. The answer was both simple and overlooked. The Araco Cobra's potential had been unlocked through creativity, adaptation, and teamwork. The Germans could not replicate this synergy because their forces emphasized rigid adherence to doctrine rather than adaptive innovation. Soviet wartime experiences with the P-39 also influenced post-war aviation strategy. The emphasis on reliable communications, formation discipline, and flexibility in aircraft employment became standard considerations for future fighter development. The Araco Cobra, once a cautionary tale of rejected design, became a case study in maximizing the effectiveness of available technology. Military planners learned that integrating machine capabilities with tactical doctrine and allowing pilots and mechanics the freedom to innovate could yield results far beyond what conventional performance metrics suggested. Beyond strategy, the P-39 Araco Cobra also left a human legacy. Pilots like Porrishkin, Rakolov, Glinker, Gulev, Club, and Babcock became legends in their own time, celebrated for their skill, bravery, and creativity. Their stories, intertwined with the narrative of the aircraft, provided inspiration for future generations of aviators. The awards they received, including multiple Hero of the Soviet Union honors, Orders of Lenin, Red Banner, and the American Distinguished Service Medal for Porrishkin, symbolized recognition not only of personal heroism, but of the transformative role of the P-39 in the war effort. The Araco Cobra's final chapter came with the retirement of the last operational units in 1949. By then, jet fighters had taken over frontline duties, and the propeller-driven P-39 was gradually phased out. Yet its legacy endured in both the lessons it provided and the remarkable achievements of the pilots who mastered it. Museums and historical exhibits now preserve the story of the Araco Cobra, often emphasizing its rejection by Western forces. But for those who flew it over the skies of Russia, the P-39 was never a failure. It was a powerful, reliable, and decisive weapon. In many ways, the story of the P-39 Araco Cobra is about more than just one aircraft. It is about understanding context, the importance of matching technology to mission, and the value of innovation under pressure. It is about the courage and ingenuity of pilots and mechanics who transformed a rejected fighter into a dominant force. It is about the difference between using a tool blindly and mastering it thoughtfully. In the Soviet experience, the Araco Cobra was not merely an aircraft. It was a force that enabled victory, shaped doctrine, and changed the course of aerial warfare on the Eastern Front. The lessons extend beyond aviation. In any field, military, technological, or organizational, the effectiveness of a tool is determined not solely by its design, but by how it is applied. Rejected tools, when understood and used correctly, can achieve extraordinary results. Context matters, strategy matters, human ingenuity matters, and as the P-39 demonstrated, sometimes the greatest successes come from the resources others overlook, underestimated, or dismiss outright. In the end, the Aracobra's story is a testament to adaptability, perseverance, and the power of human insight. From its first deliveries to Soviet squadrons to the final aerial victories of World War II, the P-39 proved that even a supposedly flawed machine could achieve greatness when used wise. Alexander Porrishkin, Grigory Rakolov, and their fellow aces exemplified this truth, achieving results that reshaped perceptions of what was possible in aerial combat. This story reminds us that history is not only about machines or numbers. It is about the people who wield them, the choices they make, and the strategies they employ. The P-39 Araco Cobra, once discarded by the West, became a symbol of what can be achieved when skill, innovation, and context converge. It remains a powerful lesson for pilots, strategists, historians, and anyone who seeks to understand how the right application of tools can turn failure into triumph.